I still remember the exact moment everything began, and, looking back, the moment everything started to fall apart. It was a humid summer evening in Austin, Texas. My younger brother Jake and I were sitting on the cracked wooden porch of our childhood home, drinking cheap beer and complaining about our dead-end jobs. I was working construction, breaking my back for someone else's dream, while Jake bounced from one gig to another, never really sticking to anything long enough to build something real. That night, I had an idea. Not just a passing thought, but one of those ideas that hits you like lightning, the kind that makes your chest tighten because you know it could change your life. I started talking about a mobile home renovation business, buying rundown trailers, fixing them up, and reselling them for profit. Affordable housing was booming, and I saw an opportunity no one else in our circle even considered. Jake leaned forward, eyes lit up. "Man, that could actually work," he said. And that was all it took. Within weeks, we pooled together every dollar we had. I sold my old pickup truck. Jake convinced our mom to lend us money she definitely couldn't afford to lose. We bought our first beat-up trailer on the outskirts of town. It was a disaster. Broken pipes, mold creeping along the walls, floors that creaked like they were begging for mercy. But I didn't see a mess. I saw potential. I worked 12, sometimes 14 hours a day, tearing it apart and rebuilding it piece by piece. Jake handled the business side. At least that's what we agreed on. At first, it felt like we were unstoppable. We laughed while working, argued over paint colors, ate takeout on the floor because we didn't even have furniture yet. It felt like we were building something bigger than just a business. We were building a future together. When we finally sold that first trailer, the profit wasn't huge, but it was real. Real enough to prove we were onto something. That's when things started to change. Jake began talking differently. Bigger risks, faster expansion, more loans, more deals. He started dressing sharper, acting like a businessman instead of the guy who used to split a six-pack with me on the porch. I should have seen it coming. But when it's your brother, your own blood, you don't expect betrayal. Not like that. Success has a strange way of blinding you. After we sold our first few renovated trailers, things started moving fast, faster than I was ready for. What began as a small hustle quickly turned into something that actually looked like a real business. We had 3 properties at once, then 5. Contractors started recognizing our name. Local suppliers began giving us small discounts. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was finally getting ahead. And Jake, he loved it. He leaned fully into his role, the business guy. He handled the paperwork, the deals, the bank meetings. At least, that's what I believed. I trusted him without question. I mean, why wouldn't I? He was my brother. I was too busy working. Every day, I woke up before sunrise and got straight to it. Demolition, wiring, plumbing, painting. My hands were always cut up, my back constantly aching, but I didn't care. This was ours. Every nail I hammered felt like I was building something permanent. But somewhere along the way, Jake stopped showing up to the job sites. At first, it made sense. Meetings, he'd say. Investors. Opportunities. He always had a reason, and honestly, I was too exhausted to question it. If he said he was growing the business, I believed him. Then came the paperwork. One evening, Jake showed up with a stack of documents and that same confident smile he'd been wearing more and more lately. "Just standard stuff," he said, tossing the papers onto the kitchen table of one of our renovation sites. "We're making things official, expanding, protecting ourselves legally." I remember wiping dust off my hands, barely even reading what I was signing. That's the part that still haunts me. I signed everything, page after page. Jake stood there, guiding me, pointing where to initial, where to sign. He made it sound routine, like something every growing business had to do. I didn't think twice. Why would I? Weeks passed, and the business kept growing, but something felt off. Money wasn't adding up the way it used to. We were doing more deals, but I wasn't seeing the same returns. When I asked Jake, he always had an explanation. Reinvesting, he'd say. Scaling up. Trust me, it's going to pay off. That phrase, trust me, started to sound different. Colder. Distant. And then one afternoon, I got a call from the bank. Not Jake. Me. That's when I realized something was very, very wrong. I was standing in the middle of a half-finished living room when my phone rang. The place smelled like fresh paint and sawdust, sunlight cutting through dusty windows. I had a hammer in one hand, sweat dripping down my neck, and for a second, I almost didn't answer. Unknown number. I figured it was another supplier or maybe a telemarketer. I wish I hadn't picked up. Is this Daniel Carter? The voice on the other end asked. Yeah, that's me. This is First National Bank. We need to speak with you regarding your outstanding loans. Loans. Plural. I leaned against the wall, suddenly feeling like the air had been sucked out of the room. What loans? I asked, already knowing I wasn't going to like the answer. There was a pause, the kind that tells you everything before the words even come. Sir, according to our records, you are the primary guarantor on 3 active business loans totaling just over $420,000. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because it didn't make sense. That's not possible, I said. You've got the wrong guy. My brother handles that stuff. Another pause. No, sir. Your name is on every document. You signed personally. That's when my stomach dropped. The papers. Those damn papers I signed without reading. My hand started shaking, and I had to sit down on the bare plywood floor. I could barely hear the rest of what she was saying. Interest rates, missed payments, legal obligations. It all blurred together into one suffocating realization. Jake hadn't just been running the business. He'd been rewriting it, and I had handed him the pen. I hung up without saying much. I don't even remember what excuse I gave. All I knew was I needed answers, and I needed them now. I drove straight to Jake's place across town, a nicer part of Austin. Of course it was. When I pulled up, I just sat there for a minute, staring at his new truck in the driveway. Shiny. Expensive. Definitely not something we could afford, at least not the way I understood our finances. That was the moment it all started to click. The meetings, the missing money, the paperwork. It wasn't mismanagement. It was something else, something worse. I walked up to his front door and knocked harder than I meant to. Jake opened it with that same confident expression, but the second he saw my face, it cracked. Hey, man, what's going on? He asked. I didn't answer. I just stepped inside, closed the door behind me, and said the only thing that mattered. You better start talking. Jake didn't answer right away. He just stood there in the middle of his spotless living room. Hardwood floors, brand new furniture, the kind of place that didn't match the guy I grew up with. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. The silence stretched tight, like a wire about to snap. I could hear my own heartbeat. Say something. I finally snapped. Jake ran a hand through his hair and let out a slow breath, like he was the one under pressure. It's not what you think, he said. That line. God, I hate that line. It's always exactly what you think. Sometimes worse. Then explain it to me, I shot back. Because the bank seems pretty sure I owe them $400 grand. He looked away. That was the first real answer I got. Jake walked over to the kitchen, grabbed a glass of water, took his time. Too much time. Like he was buying seconds he didn't deserve. We needed to grow, he said finally. You don't build something big playing it safe. I felt something inside me tighten. Don't give me that, I said. You put loans in my name without telling me. I didn't hide them, he replied quickly. You signed everything. That hit harder than I expected. Because he was right. Legally? Yeah, I had signed. But that wasn't the point. You knew I trusted you. I said, my voice lower now. You knew I wasn't reading all that fine print. Jake shrugged, and that's when something broke in me. It's business, he said. You handled the labor. I handled the strategy. Strategy? I stepped closer to him. You call this strategy? You buried me in debt. No, he snapped, finally raising his voice. I built something bigger than you ever could have on your own. That sentence hung in the air like a slap. Bigger than me. That's what this was about. Not just money. Not just the business. Ego. You think this is yours? I asked quietly. It is mine, he said without hesitation. The company's under my control now. Legally. I stared at him, trying to process what he'd just said. Wait, what? Jake didn't back down. When you signed those documents, you transferred majority ownership. I restructured everything. Investors wouldn't come in otherwise. I actually took a step back. It felt like the floor shifted under me. You stole it, I said. No, he said, shaking his head. I saved it. I laughed, but there was nothing funny in it. You saved it by cutting me out? You were slowing things down, he said flatly. Too cautious. Too small. That was it. That was the moment I realized I wasn't talking to my brother anymore. I was talking to someone who had already decided I was expendable. I didn't yell. I didn't throw a punch. I just looked at him for a long second, nodded once, and said, You just lost the only person who made that business worth anything. Then I turned and walked out. And just like that, I had nothing. No business. No brother. Just dead. And the truth. I didn't go home that night. Honestly, I didn't even know where home was anymore. I ended up parking my old work van near a quiet stretch of road just outside Austin. The engine ticked as it cooled, and for a long time, I just sat there in the dark, staring through the windshield like something out there might make sense of everything. It didn't. What I did have was a number stuck in my head, $420,000. Debt. Not shared. Not ours. Mine. The kind of number that doesn't just scare you, it suffocates you. I kept replaying everything in my mind. The porch, the first trailer, the long nights, the laughter, and then the signatures. Always the signatures. I don't know how long I sat there before I finally leaned forward, rested my forehead against the steering wheel, and just let it hit me. Not anger. Not yet. Just exhaustion. The kind that crawls into your bones and tells you it's over. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom. There's a strange clarity that comes with it. Because when you've got nothing left, you also have nothing left to lose. The next morning, I woke up stiff, cold, and still in the same clothes. My phone was full of missed calls, mostly unknown numbers, probably the bank, maybe creditors already circling like vultures. But there was one message that stood out. A guy named Luis. He was one of the contractors who had worked with me from the beginning. Good man. Honest. The kind of guy who shows up early and leaves late without complaining. His message was simple. Hey man, heard something went down. If you need help, call me. I stared at that text for a long time. Because up until that moment, I thought I had lost everything. But I hadn't. Not really. I still had my skills. I still had my reputation with the people who actually mattered. And I still had the idea. That was the part Jake could never take from me. That business. It didn't come from him. It wasn't built in boardrooms or bank offices. It was built with my hands. With my vision. With my sweat. And suddenly, something shifted. For the first time since the call from the bank, I felt something other than dread. I felt angry. Not wild, reckless anger, but focused. Sharp. The kind that makes you stand up instead of sink. I grabbed my phone and called Luis back. Hey, I said when he picked up. My voice was rough, but steady. You still got your tools? He chuckled. Always. Good, I said. Because I'm starting over. There was a pause. Then he said something I'll never forget. I was wondering when you'd say that. I looked out at the empty road ahead of me, the morning sun just starting to rise. For the first time in days, it didn't feel like the end. It felt like a beginning. Starting over sounds brave when you say it out loud. In reality, it's brutal. Luis and I didn't have much. Just his beat-up toolbox, my van, and whatever scraps of savings I hadn't already burned trying to keep up with the mess Jake left behind. No investors. No safety net. And definitely no room for mistakes. Our first project wasn't even a full trailer. It was a partial job, fixing a leaking roof for an elderly woman on the edge of town. Paid cash. No contract. The kind of work I would have ignored a year ago. But this time, I showed up early. I worked like everything depended on it, because it did. Word spread faster than I expected. Luis knew people. People who trusted him. And somehow, that trust extended to me. One small job turned into two. Two turned into five. Within a couple of months, we were back to doing full renovations again. Nothing flashy, nothing risky. Just solid work. Clean. Honest. And this time, every single paper that crossed my path, I read it. Twice. I didn't touch loans. Didn't chase fast growth. Didn't care about looking successful. All I cared about was control and making sure no one could ever pull the ground out from under me again. Meanwhile, Jake went the opposite direction. I started hearing things. At first, it was small talk from suppliers. Then contractors. Then even a banker I ran into by accident. Jake's company had exploded. Big deals. Multiple properties. New investors pouring money in. His name was starting to circulate in places we never even dreamed of reaching before. On the surface, he was winning. But I knew better. Because I knew how he built it. Fast money, borrowed money. Risky moves stacked on top of each other like a house of cards. The kind of growth that looks impressive until it isn't. One afternoon, nearly a year after everything fell apart, I was finishing up a job when Luis walked over, holding his phone. You seen this? He asked. I wiped my hands and took it. It was an article. Jake's company, front page of a local business site. At first, my chest tightened. I thought it was another success story. Then I started reading. Over-leveraged. Missed payments. Legal disputes with investors. My eyes moved faster with each line. Filed for bankruptcy protection. I didn't say anything. Didn't celebrate. Didn't smile. I just handed the phone back and leaned against the wall, letting the weight of it settle. It wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't revenge. It was something quieter. Something final. Because in that moment, I realized something important. Jake didn't lose because of me. He lost because of how he chose to win. And me? I was still standing. Still building. But this time, on my terms. About 6 months after I read that article, I saw Jake again. Not at a business meeting. Not in some polished office with glass walls and expensive chairs. It was at a gas station just outside Austin. I almost didn't recognize him at first. He was standing by an old sedan, the kind of car he would have laughed at a year ago. His clothes were wrinkled, his posture different, like someone had taken the confidence he used to wear and quietly stripped it away. For a second, I thought about just driving off, letting the past stay where it belonged. But something in me said no. Not for closure. Not for revenge. Just to see what was left. I stepped out of my truck and walked toward him. Gravel crunched under my boots. And when he looked up, our eyes met. That moment, it wasn't dramatic. No music. No tension in the air. Just two brothers and everything that had happened between them. "Hey," he said. Same voice. Different man. "Hey," I replied. We stood there awkwardly for a second, like strangers trying to remember a shared language. "I heard you're doing okay," he said, nodding toward my truck. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. Paid for. Earned. "I'm working," I said. "That's enough." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I get that now." There was a long pause. I could see it in his face. He wanted to say more. Maybe apologize. Maybe explain. Maybe justify everything he'd done. But some things don't fit into words once they've gone too far. "I messed up," he said finally. Simple. Late. But real. I looked at him for a long moment, searching for something. Anger, maybe. Bitterness. Some leftover piece of the man I was when everything fell apart. But it wasn't there anymore. Time does something strange. It doesn't erase things, but it changes how they sit inside you. "I know," I said. And that was it. No shouting. No forgiveness speech. Just the truth, sitting quietly between us. He looked relieved, and somehow heavier at the same time. "I lost everything," he added, almost under his breath. I shook my head slightly. "No," I said. "You just lost what wasn't built right." He swallowed, eyes dropping to the ground. I turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth," I added, "you taught me something." He looked up. "What?" I opened the door to my truck. How to never let it happen again. And with that, I drove off. Not angry. Not victorious. Just done. These days, the business is steady. Not massive. Not flashy. But real. Every project we finish stands on its own. No shortcuts. No borrowed illusions. Sometimes I still think about that porch. That night. That idea. And I realize something now I didn't back then. The business was never the most valuable thing I built. It was the man I became after losing it. A year passed. Not the kind of year you notice day by day, but the kind that sneaks up on you when you realize you're not the same person anymore. Business was steady. Luis and I had built something solid. Not big enough to make headlines, but strong enough to sleep at night without checking your phone for bad news. We had a small crew now, guys who showed up on time, worked hard, and didn't ask for shortcuts. That mattered more than money. I moved out of the van months ago. Got myself a modest house, not far from where it all started. Nothing fancy, just a place that felt earned. Every now and then, I'd catch myself doing something simple, making coffee in the morning, locking up a finished project, and realize there was no weight on my chest anymore. No fear of things collapsing overnight. That was new. As for Jake, I didn't see him again, but I heard things. He moved out of Austin, took some small job, nothing close to what he used to have. Some people said he was trying to start over. Others said he kept blaming everyone but himself. I didn't chase the truth. It wasn't mine to carry anymore. One evening, I found myself back on that old porch. Same cracked wood. Same Texas heat settling into the evening air. I hadn't been there in a long time. Not since before everything happened. I sat down in the exact same spot. For a moment, it felt like time folded in on itself. Two brothers. Cheap beer. Big dreams. I almost smiled. Because that part? That was real. Even if everything that came after wasn't. I leaned back, looked out at the quiet street. and let the silence sit with me. No anger, no regret, just understanding. Some people think betrayal ruins you, but it doesn't. If anything, it reveals you. It shows you what you're made of when everything comfortable is stripped away. When trust breaks, when the ground disappears under your feet. And if you're still standing after that, then whatever you build next, no one can take it from you.